Hey everyone, welcome to Trend Talks BizSec. This is episode 44. I'm your host, Jon Clay, VP of Threat Intelligence here at Trend, and joining me again is VP of Cybersecurity. Greg, how are you?
Great, John. And I'm excited today to hear about your travels to the nation's capital.
Yeah, so last week, not sure when you all got this, but this was basically mid-June. I got to go to Washington, D.C. to do some briefings with a number of different agencies inside the U.S. government, mostly talking about Trend's threat intelligence offerings and what we're doing in terms of threat intelligence here at Trend Micro, which, you know, we've been around for many, many years. But what's an interesting thing with us is we normally in the past, for about 28 years, we used to sell our threat intelligence through our products. So everybody would, if you got our products, you got our threat intelligence. Our threat intelligence is our back end, right? That's our IP kind of thing. But just about a year and a half ago, we started selling feeds and service offerings for threat intelligence. But, you know, it was an interesting, Greg, to go. I got to go into the Capitol, got to meet with a Senate group, one of the senators' staff, and obviously just talking about what's concerning the U.S. government right now. China, nation state actors. We talked a lot about Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, APT-41. Those groups are certainly targeting U.S. infrastructure, critical infrastructure. So there was a lot of conversations about that. You know, Trend, we're a global company. We have a lot of intelligence coming out of the Asia Pacific region, specifically Taiwan and Japan, who are prime targets for Chinese actors. So we tend to see a lot of the attacks targeting those areas of the world, even maybe before they pivot over to the US or Canada or some of the other regions. So it helps us to be able to give that intelligence out there. But yeah, it was a interesting to go. Obviously, Greg, one of the challenges a lot of these agencies are having right now with the change in administration, a lot of them are tending to have some have to go through, you know, budget cuts and personnel cuts and things like that. So it is a little bit of a challenge for a lot of these folks trying to deal with what's going on there.
Absolutely, yeah. And of the sort of sectors of government, who do you think is was the most interested right now in talking about sort of cybersecurity? Which sort of, you know, because there's military, there's, you know, economic side, there's, you know, there's the pure intelligence. There's many sectors within government. Is there a sector that you saw that was kind of the most keen right now or the most lean forward?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think the intelligence groups are definitely interested in getting any kind of information about there. But again, you know, it really depended on who you were talking to and what you were talking about. Because if we're talking Russia, it's mostly about cybercrime and theft, right? Ransomware attacks, et cetera. So now you're talking to some of the agencies that are dealing with public-private, you know, partnerships and challenges within that critical infrastructure. And then you have the nation state, Chinese nation states, who are more interested in just getting into some of these infrastructure, OT networks to do a lot of education. What can they do? Where can they go? How can they do it? So it really, Greg, it really depended on who you were talking to, because the conversation certainly got tailored to what their area of focus was. But, you know, we met with CISA, which is the group that kind of is in charge of monitoring and managing and defending our critical infrastructure in the U.S. And so they are very interested in any kind of information and intelligence that you can get.
Yeah, that's a really interesting conclusion. I think it's known in sort of our circle, but for, you know, our listeners and watchers, I think the fact now that, you know, Russia's going to steal your wallet, but, you know, China is more likely to go after your infrastructure. That's a delineation.
Or espionage, right? A lot of data theft by the Chinese actors as well.
Yeah,
I mean, really,
yeah.
But it's used for different things, right? I mean, Russia will steal your data, but they're going to use it to extort you. But
Exactly.
China will steal your data to learn about what you're doing and where you're going and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's very, very critical as a organization. You understand who's targeting you and why they're targeting you, because we certainly you're going to see different attack types and IOCs and TTPs that by these different groups that target you, and you're going to have to defend things differently depending on who it is.
Yeah, that's interesting though. This delineation between Russia and China now, because before it used to be much more Russia would go after go after pure intelligence for that sake, but they seem to be more money focused now. So that's I think that's become clear.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and China has pivoted a lot lately. I mean, in the past, obviously, their biggest thing was intellectual property theft, right? I wanted to steal your plans on how to do things, right? Build a car, build a tank, build an aircraft, whatever it might be. But anymore, it seems like they want more intelligence around what are you doing, where are you going, what's your plans going to be in the future. They want to understand that. So the IP theft thing has kind of taken a wayside to more of a just pure espionage attacks.
right, yeah, interesting. Yeah, so that's a good good education, I think, for for our BizSec listeners, that there is this pivot that's happened in the last while. So cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I think another area it'd be interesting to chat with, we were talking offline about how do you deal with kind of a tough CIO, right? Or maybe a CEO or a board that really doesn't understand cyber that much. I know, obviously CISOs have a tough job, right? We've talked about it numerous times on these talks. But you've got some experience in that area, Greg. If I'm a CISO and I have to share and I have to give vision in terms of where we need to go with our cyber program inside the organization, and my CIO or CEO or even the board don't really understand it, how do I convey that information to them to make them understand the importance of a cyber program that's very resilient?
Yeah, I think there's two different sort of degrees. There's an amber light situation, which is that don't understand part, which is going to be education. And this is why I really like, this stuff we're working on in cyber risk quantification, because that changes the communication over the business sense. So you can have instead of a tech discussion, it becomes a business discussion. So that is definitely what, CISOs are interested in. The red light situation is when they're actively out to get you, or you're the fall guy. And that is unfortunately not too uncommon.
And that's usually after a breach, right?
Not even. Although I have to say, the situations I've seen have mostly been post breach. I think you're right there. So you're the new guy coming in after a breach. They haven't probably told you about the breach, and they're positioning you to take the fall for the next one, and thinking that's good enough. We're not going to change our practices because business first, or speed of business first, is the perception. So I think a lot of our, most CISOs out there have gotten that headhunter call saying, hey, there's this real great opportunity, and you find out it is, post breach, and it's going to be a difficult board or CEO who is pretty happy to have a fall guy rather than change practices quickly or spend that money or make those hard choices.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one to deal with as a CISO, right? I mean, it's such a hard job right now to navigate through all of the different areas that you're going to have to navigate. But I think you nailed it on the head here, where you're talking about cyber risk quantification now, because as a CISO now, I can go to my board, or I can go to my CIO or CEO, and I can almost give them an actual number. So if we get breached, by the way, if it's a ransomware attack that's successful, here's the amount of money that we are potentially going to lose, both revenue wise as well as some other areas, obviously cleanup costs and all that stuff. That's a powerful option for them now to move there, instead of just being able to go and say, hey, I need to protect against a ransomware attack. And then when they ask why, it's like, well, he's got ammunition now to be able to talk their language, right?
Exactly right. So you can present statistics saying, hey, we're going to get, very likely that we're going to get, 2 ransomwares in the next year, and they're going to cost between 5 and 10 million. That's really powerful right there. But when you match that with your scorecard saying, look, we can take these measures and we can reduce this in half. We can reduce the impact or the frequency by half. That's really powerful, and there's an easy decision to be made. And if the board or CEO doesn't do it and they still want to take you out, well, there's nothing you can do.
Right.
If they don't want to act on that, and when the next one happens, you've done all you can. And that's the unfortunate part of this job. And, in the CISO world, is that there is that reality that sometimes you are the guy at the poker table wondering who the sucker is. So,
yeah. But, and also I think with the tools that are coming out just over the last 18 months now, they also have the ammunition to be able to go, by the way, if I spend X amount of money on this because we have a gap here, or we've got a hole in our defense area here, this will help. And then it can relate to how much we could save if we block this and do these couple of mitigation strategies over the next 3 to 6 to 12 months. It's definitely changing the game for these CISOs with the new platforms that are coming out and technologies that are coming out with them.
Yeah, vast amounts of telemetry can, translate and be boiled down into some really simple, powerful numbers, metrics, scorecards. The mistakes I see CISOs making is, going all in on scorecards, which is great, but then not matching it with the options, the recommended options you'd like to take. So, hey, if we spend $1 million on MFA, yeah, it's going to be a little cumbersome, but even if we only save $1 million with it, per year, that's powerful. And it's not a made up number. It's a number that you can have confidence in. So that's why CRQ is so good. So scorecards plus actionable recommendations.
I mean, especially when almost every attack these days has some form of a credential theft, account compromise that eventually leads to either data theft or a ransomware attack or some other type of attack that causes the pain and causes monetary pain for an organization. So now you can weigh that, hey, $1 million to save 5 million or 10 million in cleanup costs of a ransomware attack. Yeah, that's probably not a bad investment at this point.
You and I have both met a boatload of CISOs in the last few months that we're spending time with, and it's always the big three, right? It's going to be email needs to be better secured, MFA needs to be implemented, or unmanaged devices. That's the top three. And number 4 100%. Is probably visibility in other parts such as the network that you're blind to.
Yeah. And unfortunately, right now, the news and what everybody's talking about in the industry is AI, right? And unfortunately, we know, and you and I both know, and we've seen it over and over again, that just the basics can really stop an attack without dealing with the AI or implementing AI or whatever it might be. It's just, I mean, it's pretty wild these days that unfortunately the conversations have been taken over by AI so much, where the true conversation should be talking about how do we shore up our current defenses, because you can just do some simple things to really prevent an attack now.
Yeah, and AI for defenders is exciting, but it's going to help us do all those things. But you're absolutely right that AI for attackers, it's interesting. It's going to help them send better crafted phishing messages, but that's not the problems we have that are going to burn us tomorrow. An AI attack is not going to be the sole cause of something bad that happens tomorrow. It's going to be an
unmanaged device. It's going to be a weak password. Exactly. Hey, so you were sharing something not too long ago where you had a friend or a buddy or something that had an incident with a wearable, right? A device that was implanted, that was connected to the internet. Maybe share a little bit about that, because obviously, we talk about emerging threats, right? And we like to talk about emerging threats. This seems like one that's potential, and I don't think it was anything malicious about it. It was more of a issue with the infrastructure, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, I'm going to heavily anonymize this, but it was one of the most interesting things I've seen in quite a few years, from a theoretical kind of thing and see it actually happen. Medical device that stopped working because of a cyber attack in the medical network, and having obviously, if you have a medical device in your body that is a big, that's an impactful thing if it no longer works. This is kind of, I've always never used scenarios like that because they sound too far-fetched.
Right.
But in this case, with OT type and medical devices, security and those scenarios are often not the first thing. They're often good at the device, the HIPAA compliance stuff for the data, but the actual sort of, what about this edge scenario that happens? And this is, I think, was an edge scenario. But yeah, and I hope to be able to talk about it in a little more detail, but I don't want to, de-anonymize what was going on. But yeah, it's a real wake-up call to the unintended consequences of an attack or an outage that goes on.
Right.
And that's
because they weren't targeting this individual specifically. They targeted the organization and took out the infrastructure. The infrastructure went down that the device was connected to. So the device stopped working because it couldn't connect to their network. Right.
Yeah. And there was, there's some details there, but it wasn't a target on the medical devices, but the lesson for me was the unintended consequences that we often don't have in these scenarios. So when you look at the, yes, we're going to get ransomware, but what's those other consequences that, we can dig and find, but aren't going to be glaringly obvious. Yeah.
But this also brings up with anybody who's developing wearable tech, that what happens when the device can't get access, right? How does it run by itself, right? It should be able to, the resiliency and the ability to do kind of a backup almost way of running if everything's cut off. So, you've got to think about that. Hopefully this is but obviously they weren't, because this device should have continued to work even though it wasn't connected to the network, but it didn't.
Right. Yeah. And those unintended consequences. I think we learned a lot about that during COVID when, strange, things would happen, such as, no employees in the building. And then, you realize, people have to come in to physically reboot routers and firewalls when they get locked. And there's no way to get into the building suddenly. That was some of those secondary unintended sort of consequences I think are interesting that we learned during COVID, and we keep relearning with wearables, medical tech. I think we're going to, and just, especially in things like, telco networks and, other critical infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and again, as a CISO, you got to be aware of all of that.
You got to dig for it.
In your own network, right?
You got to dig for it. You can't just wait to be told. Yeah. You got to really,
it's IR. Yeah. It's one-on-one incident response, right? Doing doing tabletop exercises, trying to simulate things that can happen and run through them, and to make sure that you have a backup plan, you have an emergency plan. If my critical servers that run my day-to-day operations, if those are taken out by a ransomware attack, how do I get those back online quickly? Do I have a way to bring up a separate network that can take over? I mean, there's so much to be able to have to deal with. And hopefully, technology seems like today it's gotten better and better at being able to do that. Unfortunately, as you and I know, a lot of organizations run old tech. And so that's the challenge, especially in healthcare.
Yeah. In Intel School and Counter Intel School, you have two different sets of questions you ask. And one of them is the tell me why this can't happen on the counter inside. And that's a skill that you have to press for. Nobody's going to deliver up and saying, oh, wow, look, if a firewall fails, we have to send somebody into the building to reboot it. And we've thought of that. Okay. And the other set of questions you ask are called, so what? Well, if a firewall fails, we have to do that. Well, so what? Or tell me why that can't happen, that somebody wouldn't be able to get access to it.
Right.
Those are the question sets that I think every CISO should be pushing on their staff and the IT staff to make sure that these unintended consequences are answered. Yeah.
Yeah. Great advice for anybody out there who has to deal with this kind of stuff. So hopefully you're already thinking about it. If not, something to think about, maybe talk about with your staff next week. Right.
Yep.
Well, anything else on your mind, Greg?
Yep. Ask your people, so what? And tell me why this can't happen.
Yeah. There you go. Good advice. Let's put that on our website and
Or a t-shirt.
share it
We
with
need a t-shirt. Yeah.
Exactly. Any other things you want to chat about today?
I just want to ask you what the vibe was from your meeting with CISOs when you were out, I think, on the West Coast, for example.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're all dealing with a lot of different things depending on which industry they're in. But when we had the conversations, very surprised about what Trend Micro's been doing over the last several years, and learning about some of the new platform and technology that we've been able to innovate with and build out. So they're very happy about that. Obviously, AI was a discussion, but really they did appreciate that when we talked about the threat landscape, we actually talked about some of the non-AI stuff, and they seem to get a lot about out of that conversation with us. So they're all dealing with many different things, but I think the vibe was pretty supportive. They were fairly optimistic about what's going on moving forward, especially when they started to see that they have technology that's available to them that can really help them move forward. Like we mentioned earlier, right, with CRQ and some of the other stuff right there, like attack surface discovery capabilities, the AI that's doing risk assessments, and then automating a lot of the controls and mitigation controls. So that's an exciting area for them, and I think they're looking forward to seeing where that takes them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the feedback I had in the Northeast was, number one is just, you're not stuck with just alerts if you have vast amounts of telemetry and the different conclusions you can get from that, and just how powerful that is for a lot of things, from, pure SOC operations over to, CRQ and stuff like that, being able to make those decisions. I think the other one has been a lot of the people in the retail vertical very scared right now, very nervous because of the focus by some of the attack groups that have been going on in Europe and North America, focusing on that vertical. And I think also same for telco. After Salt Typhoon, telco does a great job. It's a difficult one, but I think they're really working hard to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Yep. And I know the U.S. government is very involved in trying to get that public-private partnerships, because, critical infrastructure in the U.S. tends to be very privately owned. And
Right.
so the U.S. government has to be more of a partner than, an overlord, so to speak. So it's going to be an interesting thing as we move forward. But, you brought up an interesting thing about data, right? We've always had massive amounts of data in cybersecurity. We just never were able to take advantage of it and collaborate and so forth. But that's where the new tech, the new AI, allows us to do much more with large amounts of data than we've ever been able to do in the past. So that's where I'm excited to see where it moves.
Yeah, we had lots of telemetry from big silos, from a few silos that was very deep, like MDR, for example, right?
Yeah.
Tons of telemetry there, but having it elsewhere and be able to have it all matchable and usable, that's mighty powerful, because the bad guys know where your strongest links are, so they know if you've got endpoints locked down, they're going to go elsewhere. So how do you match with that?
Yeah, I mean, the adversaries are always going to look for the weakest point in your network to try to take advantage of it, right? And that's where hopefully this is what the platforms are supposed to identify your weakest, your weakest points, and then help you identify how to minimize the risk there and put in some mitigating controls to shore up that stuff. So that's the exciting part, that you hopefully have much better visibility into your overall cybersecurity posture than you've ever had in the past. And that's what's exciting now.
Posture is a great word. Yep, absolutely.
Cool. Well, listen, everybody, thanks for joining Greg and I on episode 44 of Trend Talks BizSec. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk about another topic. Hey, give us a like, and if you have a comment on a topic you'd like us to discuss in the future, we'd love to hear from you. With that, Greg, have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk soon.
Great talking to you, John. Thanks a lot.
See y'all.